A very good morning to each and every participant here this morning. I just want to thank God that we were able to have this webinar. I'm very grateful to our three speakers, Dr. Vijay Anand, Dr. Sanjeet Peter, and Dr. Kishore Pichamathu for taking their time this morning. Our audience is varied. We do have a lot of our mission hospitals and the CEOs here, the administrators, the doctors. So thank you for joining in. We have a few uh, foundations and other organizations who are interested in helping and supporting our mission hospitals also over here. So a warm welcome to each one of you. I know this is a busy time of the day and it is something that you have accommodated. So really thank you for that. Just quickly, two things. As we talk about the webinar, which is COVID-19 and the oxygen requirement, it would be the perfect way, for whatever donation that is coming, that it goes straight to our mission hospitals to enable them to set up the exact oxygen sources and the requirements that they need. So in that regard, your FC account as well as your CSR registration is really important. If you all need any help in either of these areas, please approach CMAI for help, either through the regional structure or through, directly through to the head office. Anyway, we are willing to help you to just get on track so that you will be supported just at the right time for the right purpose. Just also to say thank you very much to CMC Vellore also. I know there is a clash of two webinars this morning, both very good ones. So I would request all the participants here to please watch the recording of the Vellore one with regard to COVID treatments. So that's another excellent speakers there also. So with those small words of welcome, I would just say thank you very much, and to the team also for organizing it in a short and quick time. And I just pray and hope that this will be useful for each one of you. Thank you.
So I'm going to speak only on the supply side of this discussion. The other two speakers will talk about demand. So I am not an expert. My wife and me have been working in managing power and oxygen and all that for about 25 years. So that is our only qualification to speak on a topic like this. So like many of the other senior people here in mission hospitals, we moved to an area of need, to a hospital which was completely closed about 30 years ago, with no power and no oxygen. So that was the situation. And today we have quite a thriving institution. And this was how oxygen was brought in those days. From 400 kilometers away, that is our staff, Jafet. It was a 12-hour one-way trip. And very often we could not know what is happening because there's no phone network. The phone was 50 kilometers away. And we had to triage oxygen. So if the oxygen is running short, we have to decide which patient should get it. And that is the situation today with COVID. This is our latest oxygen plant. We have 2 oxygen plants. So I'm going to talk about oxygen production. So for the sake of avoiding confusion, we will stick to certain units. So for pressure, I have used pounds per square inch, and for flow, liters per minute. So there are only 2 common ways of producing oxygen. The first is using fractional distillation of liquefied air. So you liquefy air at something like minus 200 degrees centigrade. And as you slowly warm it at minus 183, oxygen starts boiling and becomes gas. And that is cooled and supplied as liquid oxygen, or it is compressed into cylinders at 2000 psi, and that is supplied as cylinders. So the problem with this is that it is vulnerable to external disruption. So supplier doesn't have enough oxygen, or the transporter has a problem, or the road is bad, then you don't get your oxygen. The second is pressure swing adsorption. So this uses pressure to pressurize oxygen, air, pass it through a dehumidifier, and then through molecular sieves which absorb the nitrogen, which is about 78% of air. So once you do that 3 or 4 times, you reach 90% concentration, and that is supplied at a minimum of 50 psi into the main pipeline. So the same is also used for the oxygen concentrators. There is another technology called volume swing absorption, where instead of a compressor, air is forced through the chambers using a fan. So this consumes much less power. But the problem is, if power stops, immediately the pressure comes to zero. So there is a risk of taking out too much of oxygen from the standby, that is the cylinders. So cylinder oxygen is easy to refill if it is available locally, and easy to scale up. You can just purchase some more cylinders. It can be used for all purposes because it is at high pressure, electricity not required. And the bulk cylinder holds 7,000 liters. And these are, I've written the cost of filling, renting, and so that is about cylinder. This is a cylinder filling plant. And liquid medical oxygen is supplied by refrigerated trucks and stored in the hospital campus using a tank that is supplied by the vendor. So the problem is, it's only possible in a major city or in a highway near a major city. Otherwise, you don't have access to it. So 1 liter of liquid oxygen translates to 861 liters of oxygen, gaseous oxygen. So it is the most compact form in which oxygen is available. And since the Indian law requires explosives permit for storing more than 1,000 liters, the usual capacity of a cylinder is the storage is 990 liters, which will last for about a day if the demand is 500 liters per minute. So I've written about the cost there. Again, does not require electricity and can be used for all purposes. So that is a liquid medical oxygen manufacturing and storage facility. So oxygen concentrators use the same principle, except that they are very miniature, portable, commonly available at 5 liters per minute and 10 liter per minute capacity. They should produce oxygen at 90% at full flow. So if that is not there, then I think you should not buy that concentrator. So please check that. And they also require uninterrupted electricity. The oxygen production stops immediately if electricity fails, and the connected patient will become hypoxic unless you have a UPS. And I've written about the consumption and the costs there. Only problem is it is at low pressure, so it cannot be used to drive ventilators and anesthesia machines and things like that. So that is a standard oxygen concentrator. So this is the cost. So a 100 liter per minute oxygen plant is approximately 30 lakhs, probably much more now during the COVID period. And it will consume about maybe 8 to 11 kilowatts of power. Again, you need uninterrupted power. And 200 liters per minute is 45 lakhs and 15 kilowatts. These plants can also be used to fill cylinders, but that is very expensive because from 50 psi you have to increase to 2000 psi. So 50 bulk cylinder per day plant for filling cylinders will probably cost about 1 crore rupees. This is our small plant. So you can see that orange compressor, and the next is a dehumidifier, and then the next is the oxygen plant, and then the storage tank. The dehumidifier is needed to remove the water from the plant, otherwise it will damage the oxygen plants. So power is very important. So we have to calculate exactly how much power is needed and see that it is within the sanctioned load by the electricity board, and maintain a 20% buffer capacity in our transformers and generators. If you put too much of sanctioned load, that is also not good because it will increase the electricity bill. And we need piping, copper pipes. You can also use a flexible pipe if there is a gap between buildings. And we need a low pressure alarm and automatic changeover. The moment the pressure drops, it should change over to cylinders. So that is a pressure alarm. So these should be kept in the end user points like the ICU and places like that. And this is the automatic changeover switch. So I've shown also the flexible piping in case copper is not available, and the cylinder bank. So to maximize oxygen availability, we have to keep on checking for leaks and set the targets lowest settings and switch to medical air whenever possible, switch to low pressure whenever possible. So medical air plant costs around 6 lakhs for a 10 horsepower plant, which gives about 900 liters per minute, so 7.5 kilowatts. So this is useful because it saves a lot of money, and but you should check what type of load is connected to it. So that is our medical air plants, 10 horsepower. I just want to go quickly through this anesthesia workstation. So the Draeger workstations, they don't require oxygen at all for running the ventilator because it uses electrical ventilator. Penlon allows use of air, and the older GE allows oxygen. So they will consume a huge amount of oxygen. So this is without oxygen, using another ventilator to run a GE machine, and air in a Penlon, and this is electricity Draeger. You can check the purity by connecting an anesthesia gas module. Oxygen demand, I'll put up this link. So roughly how much do you need? So for a hospital of our size, with these type of loads, we are having all these things. We need, we are calculated and that we have put 330 liter per minute oxygen plant. And this is the electrical thing on the other side, 473 kilowatts sanctioned load and different gensets. So the correct genset should be connected, otherwise you will end up wasting diesel. And how do you estimate consumption? So oxygen flow meters are very expensive. So simple way is you disconnect all the oxygen sources except the bulk cylinders, connect about 4 or 8 of them, and connect the average load, and then see how much time it takes to empty all the 4 or all the 8. So now we know what is the flow rate. Similarly, if you want to know long-term flow rate, we know that our plant takes 17 kilowatts of power to make 220 liters per minute. So you connect a unit meter for maybe 1 month time, and then you divide by 17, you know how many hours the plant has run. And then from that, you can calculate how much oxygen was the average consumption. So this is a method that is roughly used to plan the size of a plant. And for oxygen demand, you calculate the non-COVID demand in the way I have already mentioned. And for COVID, you have to calculate surge demand because this is not going to be throughout the year, only for the particular wave. So calculate the size of COVID ward, how many devices are connected, take into account supplier distributor disruption, and whether liquid medical oxygen available or not, and so on, and then make up your mind how much size. And we must have redundancy because if one fails and the other is not available, then patients are going to die. So ideally all 4, and then depending on your situation, you choose which you can add on. An important thing is about maintenance. So if you give the maintenance to a company, it comes to about 2 lakhs per year, which is for service and visits. Ideally, there should be oil-free compressor, and the filters should be checked and replaced constantly, otherwise it will damage the zeolite chambers. Normally, the chambers should last for more than 10 years. But if oil or air, water gets inside, then they'll get damaged. So you need a very good quality maintenance team. And if the compressor fails, it should be immediately replaced or serviced. So somebody should be available there all the time to switch to another pressure source. And you need a top quality maintenance staff. So this is our maintenance Gautam. He's a ITI trained person. So we need somebody like this who can get their hands dirty, open up the machine, find and plug a high pressure leak, or like we needed to shift a 3-ton plant to the 2nd floor. So instead of having somebody who calls up the company and says, please send somebody, and that person comes 1 month later. Because for oxygen and power, we can't wait for 2 or 3 days because people are going to die quickly. So let me stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. well explained with clarity, clear clarity. I request the participants to put in your questions in the chat. We have with us Dr. Sanjeet Peter, heading the devoted surgical team, Nadia, the Chief Cardiovascular Surgeon. I hand over to Dr. Sanjeet Peter.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Priya and Abhijit and everybody else for organizing this. I'm going to try and share my screen and let's see if, yeah, so since everybody is listening carefully, I will safely assume that I am seen, heard, and you can see my screen. So with that, the topic that we're going to talk about and discuss today is NIV interface and innovations. I have disclosure that I'm glad I was introduced as a cardiovascular surgeon and not a cardiothoracic surgeon. Though I'm a qualified thoracic surgeon, I've stopped doing thoracic surgery more than 20 years ago. I do the occasional, but that doesn't permit me to call myself a thoracic surgeon. Most cardiac surgery units manage their own ICU, hence my interest in ventilation. And yes, I'm not an expert on COVID-19. The Heart Institute, we are in Gujarat, as you can see, we are exactly between Ahmedabad and Baroda. We do exclusive cardiac work, about 350 open heart surgeries a year. Our mission statement is to making world-class cardiac care accessible and affordable and helping ensure a healthier tomorrow. So when we were asked to convert our hospital by the government to a COVID hospital, I was taken aback because you see, in today's world, there's nothing else except COVID that exists. And honestly, there are people who have heart ailments as well, who have stomach ailments. There are children who have other things. So everything seemed to have come to a standstill. So I requested that we continue our cardiac work. And fortunately, people believe that yes, hearts also need to continue on. And so that's why we are doing a bit of both. I'll get to the point here. The triad of COVID-19 therapy is mainly focused on oxygen, steroids, and anticoagulation. And I'll focus on the oxygen part of it because this is the oxygen therapy part of it, because that is the need of the hour. If you look at the headlines today, it's the oxygen crisis, and therefore its wise use in this need of hour is the most important. Oxygen therapy in COVID, there are different types: nasal prongs, oxygen mask, high flow nasal cannulae, non-breathable mask, commonly known as the NRBM, the non-invasive ventilation, which is the NIV, is a CPAP or a BiPAP, and mechanical ventilation. It's good for us to know that there are mild, moderate, and severe. We need to concentrate only on the moderate and severe. They are the ones who might need oxygen. The moderate, as defined, is where the saturation is between 90 and 93. The severe is when there is less than 90 on room air. What is the algorithm to achieve the target of 94? Now, what we have seen is that when there is the lower end of moderate, when we are talking about 92 and 93, just a small nasal prongs or even a face mask of 2 to 4 liters should be adequate. When the saturation is between 80 and 90, that's when 88 and 90 or below 90, that's when NRBM is the most commonly used method of oxygen delivery today in COVID. And it ranges, depending on what the original saturation was, from 5 liters to more than 15 or even 20, 30 liters per minute. So this is where we are going to concentrate on and say that the small amounts of oxygen, maybe 1 liter, 2 liters, and 3 liters, probably don't consume that much of oxygen unless you have a large volume of those patients. However, even 2 or 3 patients requiring 20 or 30 liters per minute would naturally consume a lot of oxygen. So our questions today are such high flows of oxygen absolutely essential? And if we are unable to achieve a saturation of more than 92 on high flows of NRBM, is NIV the only way forward? So a good thing for us to do is to look at oxygen delivery again. Look at the source, look at the circuit, and look at the interface. The sources, there's of course the concentrator, there's cylinder, and the pipeline, whatever the pipeline source may be. The circuit, there are tubings, there's a reservoir, some of them with tubing plus a reservoir, which is the NRBM. There's a single limb. Most CPAP machines come with a single limb of circuit, and there's a double limb like most ventilators come with. The patient interface, there's nasal prongs, there's face mask, there's a fitted mask, and of course there's invasive. So that's the endotracheal tube. Now, most of them, we know that if you're using a tubing, you go to nasal prongs or a face mask. If you're using a tubing and a reservoir, you go to a face mask again. Same way, single limb, you go to a fitted mask. Double limb, again, you go to endotracheal tube. The way to think and the way to think out of the box is to see whether we can mix and match in a different way. For example, can we use a tubing plus a reservoir and put it into a fitted mask rather than to a face mask? Attach another single limb as well, or put a double limb with a reservoir with a fitted mask. So these are the ways when we think we will probably come up with better solutions. And so let's relook at our strategy again. And again, it is this area that we are going to concentrate on. That is the saturations which would then require of oxygen flow of more than 5 liters. Now, can we add another step here, which is a fitted mask with an NRBM and an exhalation circuit? So a fitted mask without an extra circuit. And could we add a CPAP with oxygen piggybanking onto it? So how does the NRBM work actually? There's advantages of, it's a reservoir bag. It's connected to any source, which we looked at. Patient does not rebreathe, and that's the important aspect of it. It is very simple to use and procure. What are the disadvantages? The entry into the bag of this oxygen is at right angles to the reservoir. Same opening for inhalation and exhalation of oxygen entry. The leakage of oxygen around the mask is enormous. Exhaled oxygen is actually wasted. Exhaled air escapes to the surroundings, making it probably more infectious, and the kinks and blocks making its use in the prone position very difficult. So this is the NRBM mask, and as you can see, the entry of oxygen into this bag is at right angles. It's very easy to kink. These are the exhalation valves, which actually don't trap any oxygen which the patient usually exhales, and certainly doesn't trap any viruses that will be exhaled with this. So we looked at a different method, and we thought of using a fitted mask, and therefore you have no leaks around it. The inflow port is different, and the outflow port is different. It's use a reservoir, and the outflow port is exactly opposite the inflow port. The reservoir can be a slightly larger. We added an exhalation circuit, and at the end of that exhalation circuit, we added an HME or an antibacterial or an antiviral filter. And we also found that this particular circuit can be used for proning. So this is what this is how we make our circuit, and as you can see, it can be easily used when the patient is prone, doesn't come in the way of oxygen delivery, doesn't come in the way of the patient being comfortable to sleep. We use the PVC tapes to actually stick a urine bag onto a T-piece. This makes it stronger and to a large extent waterproof. Now, how does this work? If you see the oxygen flow required, if we talk about the tidal volume into the uh, respiratory rate will give you the minute volume, that into 3 will be approximately the amount of oxygen flow that is required for a minute. Now, if 400, let's say, is the approximate tidal volume that we're talking about for adults, uh, 30 is the respiratory rate, we're looking at 12 liters minimum that the patient needs to inhale. Now, if this patient has a inspiratory expiratory time of 1:1, then we're looking at 24 liters per minute. Now, can we actually reduce this 24 liters per minute of oxygen flow? Uh, the HME filter at the end of this, if you can see that there, actually maintains the humidity. We had a bit of a problem initially that even the oxygen that we were providing to this entire circuit was humidified oxygen. That is the one that goes through this oxygen bubble trap. And then we found that it was a lot of humidity developing within the circuit. This circuit, in addition, provides a minimal PEEP. As you can see, we tried measuring the amount of PEEP. This is at the end of this, all the circuit, all the filters have a Leo lock, and you connect a Leo lock to a device which measures the amount of pressure there, and then you get the pressure that generates there within that. And we found that it actually produces a small amount of PEEP, only about 2, but that seems to be enough. The material of reservoir can be flexible. We use a urine bag, you can use anything else. Material of tubing can be flexible. We started off by using the original medical grade T pieces and the angle pieces, and then we found that they're very difficult to get by and difficult to procure as well, because in large numbers. So we just started using CPVC pipes. The type of fitted mask again can be changed. Ensure that it has only one entry and there are no exits all the way around. Now, if you see that there are small ports there, actually those are for giving oxygen directly. Yes, you can give oxygen directly, but there's no place where you can have a reservoir for the oxygen, and hence you need this reservoir here. So ensure that those ports, if there are, can be closed. If there is an exhalation valve within this mask itself, it has to be closed. Or there are some masks which come with a T-piece attached and the other end is open for the exhalation. Then you can just put a HME filter or an antiviral filter at the other end of this. This exhalation tube, we've used a ventilatory circuit. We've cut it up and put it over there. And I think that works pretty well. What are the things that we need to watch out for? We need to watch out for this excess humidification. And what we just do is open it up occasionally and dry it and wipe it off with a piece of gauze. Sometimes the water accumulates in this urine bag. So it's a good thing we have this opening so we can just empty the urine bag. The other thing to watch out for is that too tight for too long can cause scars and sometimes even an injury. And the third and most important thing to watch out for is carbon dioxide retention, because the physics behind this is that when the patient inhales, when the patient exhales, this portion actually traps that exhaled air. The excess exhaled air escapes through this. So when the patient inhales the second time, he's inhaling from here as well as from here. So if he's going to inhale his exhaled air, there is a possibility of oxygen trapping. So of carbon dioxide accumulation. And hence, it's important for us to note that they can have drowsiness, lethargy, a breathing pattern, confusion, they change in breathing pattern. So you can, and the treatment for this is actually very, very simple. You just need to shorten this limb. So if this particular patient on the right, there are two things I want you to notice here. His exhalation limb is much shorter. And third, the patient interface is different from this mask. It's a regular anesthesia mask with a regular anesthesia harness. Now, these are also available, and this is also equally comfortable. if you see the upper end of the mask, you can actually inject air into it to make that whole mask more comfortable for the patient. You can, instead of using this T connector, you can actually use even a Y connector that works equally well. So a Y connector where to one limb you attach the reservoir and to the other limb you attach the exhalation port and the exhalation PEEP, and this goes to the mask. What have we found? We found that oxygen flow reduces by nearly 50% when compared to NRBM. So patients who've required 20 liters of oxygen have typically required only about 7 or 8 liters of oxygen when we use this particular circuit. This avoids NIV also in many patients. As I said, this is that step between NRBM and an NIV. So it's adding a little bit of PEEP. You are using a fitted mask, and therefore our rough estimate is that you can avoid NIV in 75% of the patients, in the sense that those patients who are referred to us for ventilation, or those who we are sure that at the end of this, the NRBM has reached its peak and you now need to put them onto NIV, I think 75% of them will actually do well just with this. The weaning to a CPR mask or a plain oxygen mask, I'll come to that in a minute. There are problems. What we have found that the minimum flow is best kept at 5 liters a minute. So if on a regular mask or an NRBM, if the patient is maintaining saturations at 4 liters, there's no need to switch over to this. There is suffocation either because of too much humidification or too much of carbon dioxide narcosis, and therefore treat them as and when. We currently use actually dehumidified oxygen because anyway the circuit has an HME filter, and therefore the circuit and the air within that circuit will be humidified. Do an ABG whenever necessary, arterial blood gas. The weaning process, we use the CPR mask. A CPR mask again looks something like this. If you see within the mask, it's well fitted, and it's loose, relatively loose for a patient, very comfortable. You can use shoelaces or whatever you want, which can keep it tight. The reservoir receives oxygen again, and that goes directly to the mask. There's a lot of place around for the air to escape. So we haven't seen carbon dioxide narcosis with this, and we haven't seen rebreathing either with this. Now, usually the question will be, if you're using this, what about exhaled viruses? Because we are not using any antiviral filter, but by the time the patient reaches this stage, it's about 15 days into the disease, and what they say is after 14 days anyway, the patient is not infectious. This particular CPR mask can easily be used even when the patient is prone, and we encourage that during the weaning process. If that fails and you need to go on to a CPAP or a BiPAP, we use this circuit where we attach a oxygen port as a piggyback. Again, we use a fitted mask. It's a symbol. This is a symbol limb circuit. There is no exhalation limb in the original circuit, but we add on an exhalation limb. The exhalation limb is usually, with the ones that are supplied, is either in a slit near the mask or the side of the mask, and there is no protection to HCWs. So we provide this provides the necessary pressure, but the oxygen port is not an option, and therefore we added this oxygen port here by making a one-way valve. This is the way we made a one-way valve. We created an oxygen port by piggybacking it. That's how we did it. Use a T-piece, a glove, finger glove, cut the tip, put it into this, evert this, and then close it with the oxygen delivery valve. So let's look at our original strategy again. That was our original strategy, NRBM and then NIV. Now what do? We actually don't use the NRBM the way it is. We go straight to the DDMM mask, and what we have found is that most of the time 8 liters of oxygen will suffice. If If this above fails, then we go on to a CPAP or a BiPAP machine with an oxygen piggybacking onto it. And I must tell you, if all these measures fail, please listen to Dr. Kishore Pichumuthu, who is going to talk next. Cardiac surgeons are sometimes just called plumbers. So use whatever is available. This is a CPVC plumbing tube made by our maintenance. So again, be innovative in your oxygen delivery. There is a source, there is a circuit, and there is a patient interface. I think you should be able to mix and match. I have two things to talk about as conclusion. You have to look at the possible solutions. When there is a problem, you look at the solution and then ask yourself, does it make logical sense? If a maths teacher walks into his classroom and says that the length of a railway track is 100 meters, the breadth is 1.5 meters, what is my age? Somebody from the back is going to stand up and say, oh, you must be 48 years old. And when the maths teacher says, how did you know that? Well, my neighbor is a half crack and he's 24, so it must be, you're a full crack. So if it makes sense, go ahead with it. But if it does not make logical sense, just reject it and start again. The second thing, as a word of caution, don't depend on gadgets too much. Look at the patient as a whole and not just the SpO2. These are two separate pulse oximeters that are easily available in the market. This one costs about 1,200, or now I think in the black market must be available for double the cost. This is the other one, which original cost itself was 2,500. I recommend this one. Basically, the ones that have a waveform like this seem to be more accurate. However, that doesn't mean that that they are good. So the award for the gadget of the year undoubtedly goes to the pulse oximeter. This is a pulse oximeter that is available in Gujarat. As you can see, it's a Gujarati newspaper. It's measuring the pulse oximeter saturation of a pakoda and found that it is 93%. So yes, some pulse oximeters do work, but many don't. And some actually pretend to be pulse oximeters, like this bird called the coppersmith barbet, which has been recently rechristened by somebody called the pulse oximeter bird. And that's all I have to say. There are problems galore. Let's find the solutions. It's impossible not to be exposed to the virus. So if we are healthy, it's only by the grace of God and the time we had to be vaccinated. Please continue to pray for all the Lord's protection for all the healthcare workers, especially as we put our lives and those of our families at risk to care for those affected. Thank you, and I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjeet, for sharing valuable information. And I am happy this morning because I have the right pulse oximeter. So now I knew the difference. Thank you so much. I hand over to our next speaker, Dr. Kishore Pichumuthu, intensive care physician at Christian Medical College and Hospital. Over to Dr. Kishore.
Thank you. Thank you for having me over. The previous two talks were amazing. I've learned so much and some wonderful innovations as well. We are sure to try that out here as well. So I'm just going to be looking at ventilator, invasive ventilation aspects of oxygen consumption. So we just look at, calculating how much oxygen ventilators do consume and try to look at some ventilator strategies to reduce oxygen consumption and some patient strategies to reduce oxygen consumption as well. So it's very easy to calculate the oxygen consumption of ventilators. We must remember that the total gas outflow consists of mainly the minute ventilation. That's of course tidal volumeter respiratory rate. But there are some other components as well. There's a bypass flow. That's a constant flow that is sent through the circuit in addition to what is required by the patient. And so that's bypass flow, and that is some information that may be available on the screen of the ventilator or in the manual. It's a fixed flow. And then, of course, there is leak compensation that most ventilators have. Even though ventilator circuits should be leak-proof, there is always some leak here or there. And so it compensates, and this information about how much leak is being compensated by additional flow should be available on the ventilator screen as well. So this oxygen consumption is basically the FiO2 to the fraction into this total gas flow. As an example, if the minute ventilation of the patient is 10 liters per minute, and there seems to be a 2 liters per minute leak flow, and base flow, for example, most of the ventilators that I have are Hamilton ventilators, and they have about a base flow of 6 liters per minute. And if the fraction of inspired oxygen is 0.6, then the total consumption would be, the 0.6 into the total gas outflow. So that would be about 648 liters per hour. And then you can of course calculate if in terms of cylinder numbers how much this would last. Now of course you must remember that this is just a rule of thumb calculation in the sense that it depends on different ventilators. Like Dr. Vijay Anand mentioned, some devices that are gas pressure driven will use some of the oxygen pressure to drive the ventilator. There's some older ventilators sometimes, or transport ventilators, certain transport ventilators do this, and therefore they will consume much more oxygen. Turbine-based ventilators, these are the more recent ventilators. In the last 5 years or so, almost all new models of ventilators launched are turbine-based, and these tend to consume a little bit more oxygen than the standard compressed gas ventilators, where the ventilators operate using, by having a reservoir of compressed oxygen and air and mixing it and sending it through. So that's a usual ventilator that we see in the ICUs, the compressed gas. The newer ones are turbine-based. And the turbine-based ventilators have sometimes almost up to 10 liters per minute more oxygen consumption than the standard older model of ventilator. We must remember that ventilators can be used as NIV as well. So if you're in an NIV mode of ventilation, this calculation may not be very accurate. And leak flow compensation, of course, is much more in NIV as well. So the mode may also affect the oxygen consumption calculations. So how exactly do we reduce oxygen consumption if a patient is invasively ventilated? So the first thing to realize is invasive ventilation by itself saves oxygen. So we just looked at NIV as well as some oxygen delivery devices in the previous talk, and the flows were going up to 25 liters per minute. So if you realize even from that previous example, the flows required for a patient who's invasively ventilated is definitely less than that, while at the same time providing a higher, high FiO2 as well as higher pressures as well. And this is because of two things, of course. One, there is no expiratory wastage of oxygen, and second, of course, that it provides good positive pressure, therefore opening up areas of lung, of alveoli that are collapsed, and therefore improving oxygenation, therefore reducing the amount of oxygen required. The next thing to consider is that COVID ARDS is an ARDS, and we all know that ARDS is best ventilated using a lung protective ventilation strategy. And interestingly, this lung protective ventilation strategy that protects the lung from further damage also conserves oxygen. And therefore, I think it's important to just look at what is this, how do we actually approach this concept of preventing ventilator-induced lung injury, because when we do that, we start conserving oxygen as well. Not to go into the details of this, just that earlier we used to think that it's only the pressure that damages the lung, but now we know that it's the total mechanical power that's inflicted on the lung that actually damages the lung. So that involves not just the pressure, the volumes as well, PEEP being inappropriate, the respiratory rate, and of course, the driving pressure and the tidal volume. And among all of these parameters, everything, all of these things actually damage. The more rate, the more tidal volume, the more pressure that you use, the more oxygen percentage you use does damage the lung. And the COVID ARDS is slightly different from the traditional ARDS that we used to see in the pre-COVID time, because in most patients with COVID ARDS, their lung compliance is still preserved. It's a soft lung. And that makes it, the lung more susceptible to ventilator-induced lung injury, and that's why we need to pay more attention here. And therefore, if you look at it, the things that do make a difference are reducing tidal volume, reducing flow, reducing the driving pressure, reducing the rate, and then setting the PEEP appropriately. So how do we do this? So tidal volume is 4 to 6 ml per kg of ideal body weight. Remember, not total body weight, but ideal body weight. This is important because what does happen in many of COVID patients, because it's a normal compliance lung most of the time, is that because of the hypoxia, there is an increased respiratory drive, and the patients are breathing hard. Even after we've intubated them, sometimes they're breathing hard. This, of course, will sometimes applies to NIV as well. They're breathing hard, and they're breathing large volumes, large tidal volumes. And when they're breathing the large tidal volumes, there's going to be more lung injury. So it's important to make sure that you try and ventilate and bring down these tidal volumes. And of course, bringing down the tidal volume will bring down the minute ventilation, which will reduce the amount of oxygen flow required per minute as well. In connection with this is driving pressure. Remember that irrespective of whether you're using volume control ventilation or pressure control ventilation, you need to look at both the volume as well as the pressure, because both of these independently drive ventilator-induced lung injury as well as increase oxygen consumption. So driving pressure of less than 15 centimeters of water is the other target to try and make sure that we are not injuring the lung. We saw how the rate is a component of the mechanical power inflicted on the lung as well, and therefore we need to reduce the rate as much as possible. I'm talking about the set rate. We come to reducing the patient's intrinsic rate as well. Now, of course, we've already been reducing the tidal volume, and now we are reducing the rate as well. So this would lead to some accumulation of carbon dioxide. But remember that permissive hypercapnia is one of the principles of ventilating patients with ARDS, which means that even if the carbon dioxide does go up, remember this is already an intubated patient, so we are not worried if it becomes a bit more drowsy. But as long as the pH stays above 7.20, I can accept a slightly elevated carbon dioxide. We have seen that COVID lungs, they tend to have developed carbon dioxide retention much more easily than non-COVID ARDS would. And possibly this is because there are a lot of small areas, small alveolar units, which are still normal within these areas of affectation, and therefore they are getting hyperinflated, and that might be causing the hypercapnia. So remember that don't just target a normal carbon dioxide always. A little elevated carbon dioxide is okay as long as the pH is all right. So this would help us to reduce the rate and therefore reduce lung injury and oxygen consumption. Optimal PEEP. Now this may not really influence oxygen consumption, but just to complete the picture of lung protective ventilation, remember optimum PEEP is important to keep the alveoli, as many alveoli as possible, open. Optimal PEEP in the sense that if you are using too little PEEP, it might lead to an increased FiO2 requirement, and therefore keeping an optimal PEEP might bring the FiO2 down. That's important. It's important also to not over PEEP. And how do we know we are giving the right amount of PEEP? That's very difficult sometimes, but there are many different ways to do it. One pragmatic way to do it is to just keep increasing the PEEP till you're able to come down the FiO2 to 50 to 60%. But that may not work always. Another way to do it, if you've got an ultrasound, is to look at the lung and to see whether because ultrasound can very easily distinguish between inflated areas of the lung and collapsed areas of the lung, and therefore you can titrate the PEEP according to that. So optimal PEEP helps to keep. Yeah, I was just saying that the optimal PEEP will keep the alveoli, the lung, as open as possible, allowing us to use less FiO2 as well. So what about patient strategies to reduce oxygen consumption? So when we've intubated the patient, often we will be sedating these patients. And in COVID ARDS, like I said earlier, there seems to be an increased respiratory drive even after we've intubated them. And in spite of sedation, sometimes the requirement for sedation is very high, because in spite of sedation, patients are breathing very hard on the tube. And these lungs are low compliance lungs, and breathing these large volumes and high rates could damage these lungs more and could prolong the duration of ARDS. So very important to increase sedation so that we overcome this kind of an increased work of breathing on the tube situation. We've also found that paralyzing the patients for the first 3-4 days, which we were not doing for non-COVID ARDS, definitely seems to overcome this problem. Because we must remember that ventilator-induced lung injury is not, although it has the word ventilator in it, it need not be caused by the ventilator. It can be patient self-inflicted as well. And this pattern of breathing large volumes and high rate definitely does that. So it's important to try and give the lung a break from it. So we found that once you intubated the patient, keeping them paralyzed for at least 3-4 days, and then you stop the paralysis, and if they're still breathing that way, maybe extend it for another couple of days, definitely seems to help. So in addition, so when we appropriately sedate plus minus paralyze these patients, automatically it does reduce the oxygen consumption because their rate comes down, their minute ventilation comes down. In addition, of course, and because their carbon dioxide production reduces as well, their requirement for minute ventilation reduces further, and we're able to come down on the minute ventilation that is set on the ventilator as well. The second strategy with respect to the patient is a prone positioning, or if prone is difficult, what we use here in our medical ICU is semi-prone positioning, as you can see in this picture. So semi-prone positioning for the intubated patient, though this patient not intubated, but semi-prone positioning for the intubated patient, what it does is that it helps to open up the more atelectatic and collapsed alveolar units in the posterior part of the lung and improves oxygenation. So when the oxygenation improves, we are able to come down on the FiO2. Ideally, the semi-prone positioning should be held for longer periods of time, ideally about 16 hours in a day. So what we do is we keep them on a right side up semi-prone for 8 hours and a left side up semi-prone for 8 hours. And of course, normal positioning for the remaining 8 hours of the day. So doing this, we've usually seen that the FiO2 requirements come down whether they are in this semi-prone positioning. And so that, of course, would reduce the oxygen consumption of this ventilated patient as well. Like it was mentioned earlier, it is important to look at the oxygenation target, because having an inappropriate target would mean that we're using too much oxygen to maintain these targets. So a saturation target, once the patient is intubated, about 88 to 92 or 94 is appropriate. That translates to a PaO2 on an ABG of about 55 to 70 millimeters of mercury. Now, it's important to remember that sometimes patients tolerate saturations or PaO2s less than this for even prolonged periods of time. But that would depend on adequate oxygen delivery. That means that if the patient's hemoglobin level is adequate and his cardiac output is adequate, even if the amount of oxygen in each unit of blood is less, total oxygen delivery to the tissue is not affected. And so it's very important in these patients to pay attention to cardiac output and hemoglobin. If the hemoglobin is 7, then this patient will develop tissue hypoxia even at 90% saturation. If the patient's hemoglobin is 12, on the other hand, you may tolerate even 84, 85 saturation safely. Same thing with the cardiac output. If the patient is hypotensive or has a poor cardiac output, then the tolerance of hypoxia is going to be much worse, much less. So if we can optimize these two, then again, we can go down to lower oxygen targets safely without causing tissue hypoxia. Now, how do I know I'm causing tissue hypoxia? So we saw in the previous thing, you don't have to actually, so sometimes you don't have to go by these numbers and pulse oximeters alone. You can go by just tissue oxygenation indices. So you can see how the patient is doing. Is he drowsy? Is it because of hypoxia, cerebral hypoxia? You can look out for mesenteric ischemia, because there have been reports of increased incidence of mesenteric ischemia when we choose lower oxygenation targets. Myocardial ischemia in those who are prone to it. Renal dysfunction and an increase in lactate. All of these might indicate that the tissue oxygenation is getting affected. So you could use these as markers and go down lower than the saturation target. That allows us to use lesser oxygen, and many patients would tolerate it, of course. Then there are, of course, many other small things that we can do. Like we've seen earlier in all oxygen systems, leaks are to be avoided. So in invasive, excuse me, in invasive ventilation, we are not supposed to have any leaks. It's a nice closed system, but somehow there often are small leaks here and there. So having someone look at all the tubings every day, go through just from the ventilator end, follow it all the way to the ET tube, and check the cuff leak as well, and make sure there are no leaks, because all leaks will increase the leak compensation from the ventilator side, which means an increased oxygen consumption. Of course, cuff tubes would mean less leak and therefore less oxygen consumption as well. This is not directly related to invasive ventilation, but just some principles that we follow in our ICUs. We avoid oxygen guzzling devices like high flow nasal cannula and high flow nasal oxygen, where the lowest flow is 30 liters and goes up to 60 liters per minute, something that we cannot really afford to do at this time. The use of non-rebreather masks and innovations, as we saw in the previous talk. Whenever we're using the NIV mode, or even if you're not using a ventilator, but you're using a BiPAP device to give NIV, we must remember that the IPAP, or the pressure support that we are giving, that when we increase that, that's the same as increasing tidal volume or driving pressure on the ventilator. So when we increase that, there's going to be an increased consumption of oxygen. So it's important in most patients with COVID ARDS, type 2 respiratory failure is not a concern. It's an oxygenation failure. And therefore, what we've seen is that the PEEP is much more important in trying to maintaining oxygenation than the pressure support or the IPAP. The IPAP is a higher, in a bi-level, that's a higher pressure setting. So therefore, we try and reduce these to the minimum possible. So as we reduce this, we know that the patient will require less oxygen. And if it's a BiPAP device, you'll realize that you will need to give less oxygen piggyback flow to maintain the same saturation. What we found useful is for someone to just do an oxygen rounds. That means go around to each patient and look at these 3 strategies. Can I do something to the ventilator or to reduce oxygen? Can I do something to the patient? Is it sedation, paralysis, semi-proning? Maybe the oxygenation target, can I go even lower? To consider this every day. And, usually, what we've had, we've got some pulmonary medicine therapists who have been deputed, and some nurses who have been deputed to do this. Because the doctor may be focused on other things. And so it's important to do this at this time so that we can reduce oxygen consumption. We must remember that all these tips, we should be doing it on the non-COVID patients in the hospital as well, because the numbers are small, but they're consuming oxygen also. So this does not apply to COVID alone, but to non-COVID patients who are admitted in the ICU or the hospital. Just a little point about using small concentrators and ventilators. Like Dr. Vijayanand said, small concentrators do not develop the pressure enough to drive ventilators. But there are some ventilators, particularly transport ventilators, that have a low flow inlet option. You switch that on and it's able to accept oxygen at lower pressures. The other issue with concentrators and ventilators is the FiO2 alarm, that you must have ventilators that you're able to suppress the low FiO2 alarm, because oxygen that's coming from concentrators is often not 100%. So that is sensed by the ventilator, and then it starts alarming, saying that the oxygen supply is not a pure 100% oxygen, and that can be a big nuisance. So some ventilators even will start shutting down after some time. So there should be a way to suppress this alarm. Last point, that's of course appropriate at all times, but it's important to consider stopping inappropriate therapy early. So we have intubated, ventilated patients who are not doing well, and they're in the second week and they have not shown any progress at all, and we know that their mortality is close to 100%. It is important then maybe to talk to family early and stop inappropriate therapy, because this patient is consuming oxygen. Of course, there are other reasons we should do that, but from looking at it from the oxygen point of view, this patient is consuming oxygen as well, and therefore it might be better used for another patient. So these are the various things that I can think of when it comes to oxygen consumption and mechanical ventilation in COVID patients. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore. Lot of information in this short time. Now it is time for question and answer session. Some of the questions are already answered in the chat, some are not. So may I hand over this to Dr. Abhijit to just tell us how to go about this. I think if the speakers can just see the chat or some of the things are answered. Yeah. In NIV mode, is there any way to decrease tidal volume other than keeping PS at a minimum? It's a question for Dr. Kishore.
No, there is no tidal volume setting in NIV mode, and therefore it depends. Different devices use different terminologies. So ventilators usually use the terminology pressure support, which is a difference between the peak pressure and the PEEP. And so as you increase the pressure support, the tidal volume will increase. In a BPAP device, the IPAP minus the EPAP is the pressure support. That's the IPAP is inspiratory positive airway pressure and EPAP is expiratory positive airway pressure. And the difference between these two is the pressure support. So as the difference increases, the tidal volume increases. So that's the only way to reduce the tidal volume of a patient. But remember that patients are still breathing mostly on their own on a non-invasive ventilation. So sometimes even if you do reduce the pressure support, a patient may continue to breathe large volumes. So that does happen. So when that does happen, what we do is we use a low dose sedation. We use, of course, here we use dexmedetomidine, which what we're trying to do is reduce the respiratory drive a little bit, because in spite of reducing pressure support, patients are still breathing large volumes that could harm their lungs. And so we try and give them some sedation which not make them too drowsy or make them get intubated. So what we use is Dexmed for patients with NIV who are still having an increased work of breathing. If that does not solve the problem at all and they're still huffing and puffing on the NIV, then we find it's better to intubate them early and sedate them and paralyze them and give them low tidal volume ventilation.
This is, I think, to Dr. Vijay Anand. Maybe sir has already answered it by putting up the link for calculating oxygen demand. But the question is, how many D-type cylinders are needed for a 10 oxygen bed? For 10 oxygen beds.
So that is a demand question. So you can ask Sanjeet or Kishore to talk about that.
Dr. Sanjeet, please. The D-type cylinders are required for a 10 oxygenated beds.
The rough calculation is the maximum in COVID would be 1 D-type cylinder per day for a patient.
Then the next question is a little general question. How useful is an oxygen concentrator? Maybe this I would ask Dr. Vijay Anand, please, sir.
The advantage of oxygen concentrator is that it's very portable and can be used in a place where there is no pipeline. And it is in-house oxygen generation. So you're not dependent on the supplier or the transporter. The disadvantage is that it provides only 5 to 10 liters per minute and at a very low pressure, less than 5 psi. And the other disadvantage is that if power goes, there is no storage. So oxygen plants have a storage tank. So if power goes off for about half an hour, it will still run till the genset comes on. So here, if power goes off, immediately oxygen becomes zero. So patient will become hypoxic. So you should have a backup power like a UPS or inverter all the time. So those are the cons and pros of a concentrator.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. I think the answer on the system leakage amount at 5% has already been answered. Yes, the question regarding the think the reusing, since there are no viral filters on the NRBM mask, should these masks be reused? I think Dr. Sanjit, sir?
Yeah, so I have actually was typing that answer.
Okay.
See, the exhalation ports on the NRBM masks don't have filters. Either ways, the NRBM mask is supposed to be only for single use, meaning used for a particular patient. But they are difficult to get by in rural areas. We just can't find them. So they are being reused. So the filters are for a different reason. The antiviral filter is to make the environment safer for the healthcare workers. So yes, the typical NRBM mask is not as safe for the for the healthcare workers.
Thank you. So just a follow-up question, which actually has come before. Is there any warning signs for this whole mucormycosis that might be playing up? Because we are hearing it about it in ENT circles. Is there something that the healthcare staff can keep a lookout for when we're looking at a possible mucormycosis given the steroid treatment that is already ongoing? Anybody? I think I'm not.
Kishore, you want to take that?
Yeah, Dr. Kishore?
I think it's just we need to keep an eye out when maybe usually we are not usually thinking about it in the first 2 weeks of treatment at all. And these are patients who are recovered or recovering. So from week 3 onwards, we just kind of keeping an eye out for it. So it's only basically when we're looking at the patient, we just look for any symptoms or signs of facial pain or eye pain or headaches that we can't explain, or some nasal discharge that seems to be, or bleeding if the patient is not conscious enough to give us any information. So I think just clinical screening from the 3rd week onwards, just keeping a higher, a low index of suspicion for it is all that is needed.
Thank you.
And may I just add on that is the screening part of it, but the prevention part of it is for the first
Yes.
2 weeks. So that also has to be taken into account, like a simple thing like mouth care of the mask, the nose, that area, plus of course the source of whatever the humidified air that we are giving, the humidified oxygen that we're giving. All of these can be the sources. So that's the thing, that the first 2 weeks, 3rd week onwards, it's to look at the infection itself.
So one point I can add is that the air and oxygen that come out of medical air and oxygen plants are dry air. So they are dehumidified. So that air cannot go into the patient. So it is again rehumidified in the ICU. So if at all there is a source from the water, it should be in the ICU, where the humidifier could be infected. It can't be coming from the plant.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Dr. Vijay and Dr. Sanjit and Kishore, because these are important preventive aspects. Small things will make a big difference. I think the question on the CO2 retention has already been answered. The next question is, we currently have a usage of about 100 liters per minute per day. Would it be all right to plan for an oxygen generator plant with capacity of 300 liters per minute?
So I already answered that.
Oh, okay.
So it is always better to buy a second plant instead of getting rid of the first one, because we need a backup if one fails. So the problem with going from 100 to 300 is a huge increase in cost and the power consumption. So we should carefully estimate what is the current demand over the next 2 or 3 years, and then the surge demands. So if I would rather buy another 100 liter per minute plant. So you are now increased from 100 to 200, and you also have the redundancy, because if one fails, you have another. Or if you really want a bigger plant, buy another 200 liter plant instead of directly going for a 300 liter plant.
Thank you, sir. There are some questions about vendors which have already been answered. Aerox and Systron for PSA plant vendors in North India. Also, just to give our participants another piece of information, as CMAI, and there are a few engineers also we have called onto this platform, young engineers, innovative and ready to support. So we are looking at setting up maybe a helpline with volunteers of these engineers so that you can just call them for any advice on a vendor, on the type of machine for your setting, as well as a probable maintenance. So CMA is looking at that very seriously because we understand that will become a very important need.
One more point I wanted to tell is that industrial oxygen is actually purer than medical oxygen. So we should not hesitate to use it if that is what is available.
The question is, can we travel with oxygen concentrators?
Yeah, because they are meant to be portable, lightweight. Only problem is that power should not go off.
I think Dr. Andrews, yes, we will be sharing the link. We will request for the PPTs itself, but if not, the link is definitely will be available and will be circulated and also will be on our website. Okay, I think there is quite a few requests for a checklist, a ready reckoner of sorts. So yes, we can put a few things onto a checklist. I think oxygen leakage, yes, okay. I think CMA can work on making a checklist, a ready reckoner from this webinar, and we'll get it approved by our 3 speakers before we send it out to everyone. But other than that, please have a look at the recording also. Has Madhipura's question been answered? Is NIV mode to improve oxygenation? Is there a role for adjusting TI? Is that a question for Kishore or for Dr. Sanjit? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
That TI or the inspiratory time in non-invasive ventilation is decided predominantly by the patient. The patient decides when the inspiration ends and when he goes into expiration. And so it's only if a patient is not really taking his own breath, for example, in some situations where there's a lot of CO2 retention, we can actually use a timed mode where we set the inspiratory time. That's a very rare situation. So most NIV, the inspiratory time that you set on NIV is really just the maximum time. That means if the ventilator or the NIV machine was not able to gauge when the patient went from inspiration to expiration, how much longer should it wait in inspiration before it switches? That's all that is. So the TI or the inspiratory time is not a very useful setting in NIV. It does not guarantee that the inspiration will be longer. Therefore, it's not going to really influence oxygen. So TI setting in NIV will not influence oxygenation. In an invasively ventilated patient, increasing the inspiratory time means that more time is spent at a higher pressure. Therefore, the average or the mean pressure is higher, and therefore oxygenation can increase. That is the fundamental basis of things like inverse ratio ventilation. But we must remember that as we increase the inspiratory time, 2 things happen. One is expiratory time reduces. And so it is possible that all the air that went in during inspiration is not going to come out, did not have the time to come out during expiration. And so there's going to be trapping of air. And so it's going to lead to hyperinflation of the lung with all its consequences. That's one. The second is that as we increase the inspiratory time, it might also cause some cardiovascular side effects. You can get hypotension, for example. So we need to keep that in mind. So that's not a usual approach. That maybe one rare situation where we might use that to increase oxygenation. Otherwise, oxygenation is always increased by changing the PEEP and FiO2 rather than fiddling with the inspiratory time.
Thank you. I think Dr. Vijay has answered the question about cistron, oxygen plant. It's a very comprehensive. Cistron is good. But if there's any more questions, if there are any, if Mr. James is here or any other engineers would like to just give an opinion, maybe we can do it a little later, or we can send it out as another information document. The question regarding NIV, which doesn't have a central supply. We find that oxygenation is not as effective as with one with a central supply. Any suggestions to increase the same?
The central supply will be at least 50 psi. So it's a high pressure source. If you use oxygen concentrator, very often when the flow increases, the purity or the concentration of oxygen decreases. So that I think is probably the problem.
Is the question on COVID ARDS, do you prefer volume or pressure controlled mode? Dr. Kishore?
So not only COVID ARDS, but this is a question that always comes up: is it volume or pressure control mode? And actually, there's probably not much difference because you've got to pay attention to both the volume and the pressure. So there is no difference. You could use whatever you prefer and what you are used to. So some people always use pressure control, continue to use pressure control, but keep an eye on the volume and make sure that the volumes are 6 ml per kg, ideal body weight or less. If you're using volume control, fine, go ahead and use volume control, and then make sure that the plateau pressure is 30 centimeters or less. That's the standard for ARDS, or the driving pressure is less than 15. So if you're using volume control, keep an eye on the pressure. If you're using pressure control, keep an eye on the volume. They're both, I mean, they go together. So really, it doesn't make any difference.
Yes, Mr. James, in terms of inputs on concentrators, I think we can we can send out a document regarding that. I understand we are already at 9:23. Maybe we just do maybe till 9:30, and then maybe we can close, because I understand everybody has a day to begin.
Just one point
Yes.
to add on to actually re-emphasize what Kishore has mentioned, and that we found very useful, is that at least for the first week of the COVID ARDS, the lung overall does not require a lot of CPAP or pressures, because it is a very it's not a very resilient lung. It expands very easily, and therefore I mean, people talk about even in the BiPAP mode, the inspiratory, of course, should be low, as well as the expiratory pressure should be low. And I think that's what we have found. I'm sure Kishore will agree with me.
Yes, I'd agree that it's a very good compliance. It's a soft lung. Yes, maybe at the end of the second week with the ventilator-induced lung injury and patient self-inflicted lung injury and infections make it stiffer. But in the first 10 days or so, it's a soft lung. You really don't need very high pressures. That's true.
Question from Baptist Hospital: any alternate ventilation for HFNC to reduce oxygen consumption? Maybe Dr. Sanjit?
Yeah, so actually I've answered that and said, yes,
Okay.
if you compare HFNC and NRBM, the standard NRBM also consumes less than the HFNC. If that also is too much for you, then you use innovative methods like what we have done.
Follow up on the NI. Okay, I think we've already done that. Yes. Any questions that I have missed? I think the request for the checklist is quite. Are there any ready reckoners for oxygen, like the oxygen rounds when we do it, Dr. Kishore? Do you have a checklist already ready, which you can share with us?
Kishore, you'll need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
But,
yeah. No, I don't have a checklist as such.
Okay.
Maybe that's a good thing. We'll probably start off. This thing is very dynamic. Every
what
day
we-
we are changing
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, so what
That's
we
very-
do is,
Yes.
Priya, when we go on our rounds, one person is assigned to just go around checking leaks to see whether the flow that we have actually written in the chart is the same flow that is actually going to the patient, because invariably there could be some changes. Check whether the FiO2 that was set earlier is the same, because FiO2 is usually increased when, let's say, we are doing procedures like suction or changing the position of the patient initially. So people may just forget to bring down the FiO2 to what it was set earlier. So during rounds, you assign one person to check all of this. But to do, I mean, I don't know, we also don't have a checklist, but we have a person as part of our rounds to do it.
I think we'll try and see whether we can make this little bit of, the requests in terms of the checklists. Okay, in a turbine, okay, there's a Madhipura question. This is for Kishore. Kishore, can you read the question? In a turbine or a compressor ventilator to generate an FiO2 of 40%, what would be the oxygen consumption in liters per minute?
Okay.
Is that a math question?
No, so actually this oxygen consumption is not just based on the FiO2, it's based on the rate and the tidal volume, the leak and the base flow. So without that information, we cannot really say. So that depends on the settings. So basically, whatever calculation I had showed, the total gas outflow is minute ventilation plus leak flow plus base flow into the fraction of inspired oxygen. Now for a turbine-based ventilator, just a rough rule of thumb is add 10 liters per minute. So you will get the approximately what it's consuming. So this is at say 100% or whatever it is. So if you add 10 liters per minute to the total gas outflow before you multiply it with by the fraction of inspired oxygen. So just with the FiO2 alone, I wouldn't be able to tell you the oxygen consumption. That depends on the patient settings as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore. Question about components of an oxygen audit. Would that also amount to the checklist, or is there something that you already have as an audit checklist? Anybody? Any of our speakers?
I think that would be included in the checklist actually.
So I think that is coming out as quite an important need from our mission hospitals. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, okay, I think so. Just a quick thank you very much, Dr. Vijayanand, Dr. Sanjit, and Dr. Kishore. Very useful, and I'm sure you, either CMAI or you, will get bombarded with more questions, in the next few days. But as we look at this very important time of our hospitals deciding where they need to invest their resources and where the funds that are coming in need to be best utilized, we really pray and hope that this information will be used wisely. So as a follow-up, CMAI will look into the various checklists. We will be sending out the recordings to everyone, and it will include the PPTs. Please look at the link which Dr. Vijayanand has set up for the demand, to calculate demand and supply of oxygen. Maybe I request Abhijit to please put it up again for those who have not, who came in a little later. That formula is very important. Thank you. I think from also, I understand very much that all our hospitals are very stretched in the acute care and the curative care aspects. But from what we have heard in those various talks, maintaining or mitigating as many risk factors in the community also is just as important. So even at the OPD, if you can have a television running or a health education about diabetes, about obesity, about anemia, I think these are the other things that will go a long way in just bringing down the severity of the disease in the community as well as its spread. So this is something that I would request. And if you need good health education programs, CMA will be happy to facilitate that for you, simply because some of our mission hospitals, example, Dr. Sedavi's in CIHSR have excellent nurse educator programs which can be used. So we will be happy to coordinate that for you, so it can just be running in your OPD, or even if there is a community team going out, they can use it too. So anemia, diabetes, as well as obesity or any other risk factors that are associated with severity of COVID disease. The other thing is about vaccination. I think all of us need to get on to the vaccination drive in a big way. Yes, there is a question about the supplies, which CMAI will definitely try to address at the central level. It is going to be difficult, but we will put our efforts into that also. So I think I will end with that. Is there any other last comments from the resource persons? I mean, closing comments from the resource persons? Or from my team, any of our staff would like to say something? And otherwise we can. Okay, no, okay. Thank you so much again, everybody. We're very, very grateful for this time. And I really pray and hope that the information will be useful to each one of you, and we will do the follow-up as we have suggested.